So, we're talking about this week's Parsha, Parshat Vaeira. It's the second Parsha in the book of Shmos, the book of Exodus. And it opens up, the word Vaeira is from the opening of the Parsha when Hashem speaking to Moshe Rabbeinu, who says, Vaeira el Avram el Yitzchak, he says, I appeared to your forefathers, to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Ushmi Hashem lo nodati lahem, I did not make myself known to them with the name Hashem, my name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, which we refer to as the name Havaya, Shem Havaya. Now, this is in response, or in follow-up to the conclusion of last week's Parsha, in which Moshe Rabbeinu says to Hashem, Lama harayos ala amazeh, why have you done bad to these people? And what Moshe was asking was, the Jewish people were living in Egypt, things weren't amazing, they were already starting to be, they were being enslaved, they were being persecuted by the Egyptians to an extent. Then Hashem says to Moshe, Moshe, come, you're going to take the people out of Egypt, go to Paro, go to Pharaoh and tell him, let my people go. He goes to Paro and tells him, let my people go, and what happens? Things get dramatically worse for the Jewish people. He says, oh, you've got all this free time to whinge and complain, I'm going to make sure you don't have any more free time. And he makes things dramatically worse. They make the conditions worse, they increase the work quotas effectively without necessarily increasing the output quotas, but by increasing the amount of work that the people need to do for the same output quota, which means that they have to get the same amount done, but they have a lot more of the responsibility. The amount of work they have to do grows and continues to grow, and things get dramatically worse. So now Moshe Rabbeinu turns to Hashem, and this is the end of last week's Parsha, the conclusion of last week's Parsha. It says, Lama harayos ala amazeh, why have you made things worse? You told me that it's going to be my job to lead the people out of Egypt, to take them out of this persecution, out of this slavery. And ever since I came and opened my big mouth like you told me to, things have gotten worse. Why would you do that? Why are you sending me on your behalf to make things worse for the people? Seems like a valid question. So Hashem's response was, Vaeira, I appeared to your ancestors, to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Ushmi Hashem lo nedati lahem, I didn't make myself known to them with my name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. Hashem made himself known to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov only with the name Elohim. Whereas to Moshe and the Jewish people now going forward, they are going to communicate with Hashem. Hashem is going to interact with them with his name Havaya, his name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei.
Which means that's why it was bad?
We're going to get to it. This is just the very, very introduction. This is just what he said. Ushmi Yud-Kei Vav-Kei lo nedati lahem, I wasn't known to them with this name. And the question is, what kind of answer is this? On the surface level, at least, the Pshat answer, to a large extent, Hashem is berating Moshe Rabbeinu and he's saying, look, your ancestors, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, they never questioned me. They never challenged me and said, how could you do this, how could you do that? They had challenges, they had difficulties. They went through very big challenges and they never questioned me. And why are you coming now and questioning me? Hashem was putting him in his place, saying, yeah, you think you're going to come here and challenge me? You're going to come and challenge me like that? What about Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov? They never challenged me. It's almost like, oh yeah, those were the days when I got to deal with people that didn't challenge me, unlike you. Something you should probably never say to your child as a parent, or to a student as a teacher. But Hashem said it to Moshe Rabbeinu. So the question is, what was the message? What was Hashem telling Moshe Rabbeinu? Hashem wasn't just telling him off and rebuking him. There has to be more to it. There has to be some meaning to this challenge, or to this counter, this response that Hashem countered Moshe's challenge with. So what's going on here?
He didn't have enough faith in him yet?
It could be. We're going to address it and to show that it's not necessarily a question of faith in terms... Because when you say not having enough faith, that sounds like a bad thing. And it is. Bad thing is a very strong thing to say. But it's a lack of complete faith, which is not ideal. It's not ideal to have sub-perfect faith. And that's what it seems like happened here. But we're going to discuss it and show that, at least on the deeper meanings in terms of what Moshe Rabbeinu represents Kabbalistically relative or in contrast to what Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov represent Kabbalistically, we're going to see why they come from different angles and why that's actually appropriate.
But I am, you see very clearly that, and I think there is a sikha like that even, that Moshe, by the Rebbe, that Moshe did not really completely have bitachon in Hashem, according to those questions.
It's true, to an extent, on a level at least, yes.
And it says in Tehillim, there is pasuk, I don't remember in which one, that afilu rashaim, if they have bitachon in Hashem, Hashem will do what they want. And I can't remember which parak it is.
Bitachon is extremely powerful and extremely important. There's an expression from the story with the Tzemach Tzedek says, Tracht gut wird sein gut, which means if a person has bitachon, even if they don't deserve it, and even if it's not in the plan, they can change the plans in a way that they don't deserve by doing the right thing, by having bitachon. Now, bitachon in contrast to emunah means belief.
He didn't show complete bitachon.
Right. The word bitachon means security, insurance.
Right.
So emunah means believing that Hashem is true, believing that Hashem is real, believing that Hashem is just.
No, I don't think that's the case.
But that's not bitachon.
Right.
Because emunah, right. So, yes, you could definitely say that. And that's something that's addressed in a number of discussions in different places. But here we're going to come from a different angle and address something different. Not whether or not there was a deficit in bitachon, but the fact that this actually was an appropriate question for him to ask.
Was not or was?
Was.
Was.
And we're going to see why. And then we're going to see why, well, if it's appropriate, what was Hashem's response? Hashem says, well, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov didn't ask that, so how come you're asking? Right? So, now obviously Hashem's not a third grade kid. So it's not like, oh, they didn't ask me, so why are you asking me? There's got to be more to it than that. Hopefully. So, we talk always about, we have mentioned quite a number of times throughout this series of classes, the fact that Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov are associated primarily with the three midos, Chesed, Gvura, and Tiferes. This is something that is discussed in Zohar. It's something that we've discussed a number of times. The midah of Chesed, divine kindness, this divine attribute of kindness, is primarily something that Avram is associated with, and we see that Avram's behavior was generally very, very benevolent. Avram was an extremely kind person. He took people in from the desert, regardless of background, faith, etc., etc., etc. He fed them, he took care of them, he gave them a place to rest where they weren't going to get it anywhere else. And these are just some of the examples we see. So Avram, very clearly, it's easy to see the correlation between Avram and this divine attribute of kindness, of chesed. Yitzchak is associated with the divine attribute of strength, of being demanding, of gvura. And that's something that's associated, or it's generally associated, the scriptural reference to this that's quoted in the Zohar and other places is the fact that Yitzchak dug wells. Now, what does digging wells have to do with the midah of Gvura? Gvura, when we say that Chesed and Gvura, kindness and strength, are to an extent opposites and they contrast, strength doesn't mean being mean. We're not talking about a bad trait. We're talking about a divine attribute. It's something that's positive. It's just an opposite in approach to Chesed. Chesed is giving, Gvura is demanding. And a mashal that I like to use is of teachers. You can have a teacher whose approach in teaching is primarily one of chesed, as giving, is when a student asks a question, the teacher gives an answer. Students that learn in a classroom with a chesed-style teacher at the end of the year are going to come out with a lot of information. They ask questions, they get answers, they get information, they get responses, they get explanations. They're going to walk out with a tremendous amount of knowledge that they've learned throughout the year. Then you have a teacher who teaches with an approach that's gvura. It's more strong. It's more demanding. The teacher's not just going to give an answer to the question. The teacher's going to say, that's a good question. Where do you think you might be able to find resources that will help you reach an answer? They're going to lead the student to reach their own answer. Lead the student to get the answer on their own.
Teach them how to fish.
Correct. Now, this is one of strength. It's demanding, and the students might not like the teacher as much. And the students at the end of the year are going to come out with much less information because every bit of information that they came by, they had to work for, and it was a process to get there. But at the same time, these students are going to come out at the end of the year knowing how to find information, knowing how to get to answers. So each has an advantage, each has a disadvantage. The students in the Chesed teacher's class are going to come out with more information. The students in the Gvura teacher's class are going to come out with more skills and less information. Neither is better or worse. Each has its upside and each has its downside. They're both positive. They're both teachers who love their students and are there to give their students. They have different approaches with different outcomes. So Gvura isn't bad. It's not being mean. When we talk about being strong and demanding, we're not talking about being nasty or negative. It's something that's positive. We're talking about a divine attribute. It's just an approach that's opposite to Chesed in terms of its style. So this is Avram and Yitzchak, and that's why it's the biblical reference upon which his relationship with the midah of Gvura is based or correlated is the digging of the wells. Because that's exactly what a well is. If you came to Avram and you were thirsty, Avram would give you a cup, he'd pour some water into your cup, and you'd have a drink. Yitzchak said, let's go dig a well. There's water in the ground, I don't need to provide water. The water's there. We need to dig and get to the source of the water so that the water that's already there will come up. That's what digging wells is. That's Gvura. It's not just providing, it's unearthing that which is already there. But it takes a lot of work. It's very easy to pour a cup of water. It's very easy to hold out a cup of water and wait for someone to fill it. It takes a lot of work to dig a well. But at the end of the day, when you dig a well, you've got to the water that's there, and you're going to have a much more reliable source of water than if someone just poured you a drink of water. Because the minute Avram walks out of the room, the water supply is gone. If Yitzchak led you and helped you, coach you through digging of a well, you now have a source of water. Because you have accessed the source that the water comes from. So that's why the digging of the wells is this biblical reference that's always associated with Yitzchak's relationship with the midah of Gvura. So Avram and Yitzchak are Chesed and Gvura, and then Yaakov is Tiferes. Tiferes is beauty. Beauty, generally a very strong factor in beauty, often is the right balance of contrasts, contrasting colors, for example.
But they also both Chesed and Gvura.
Right, that's why. Because it's a contrast. It's bringing the two together in the right balance. So Tiferes, which means beauty in terms of emotional dispositions, it's associated with Rachamim, mercy. Rachamim is not just giving without discretion. Rachamim, being mercy means giving something when it's not necessarily earned or deserved, because you feel mercy, you feel pity, you feel like, you know what, I'm going to give something even though it's not necessarily been earned or deserved, because I feel mercy, I feel pity. So there is an element of Gvura, there's a recognition of the fact that there's such a thing as boundaries, there's such a thing as appropriate time and place for everything. Not everything is always appropriate everywhere. At the same time, it's bringing that together with an element of Chesed and saying, you know what, it's true that there's a time and place for everything and not everything's always appropriate, but sometimes there's also a time and place to do things when it's not officially, technically the time and place. That's Rachamim. So it's taking some Gvura, taking some Chesed, bringing them together. That's Tiferes, that's Yaakov. That's beauty. The beauty is the bringing things. It's a much more, something is going to, the reward that you get when you can really get into the grey zone and combine different factors and get into the area where things are complex, the reward's going to be much more complex. It's going to be a much more complex and deeply satisfying reward because the process was more complex. So just Chesed, just Gvura are relatively simple. Now, it doesn't mean it's easy. Doing anything properly is hard work. But, and this is oftentimes in real life, the truest challenge many times is not necessarily actually doing what we need to do. That can be hard, but it's only so hard. It's when there's confusion, when we need to figure out how to balance everything because there's this and then there's that, and I'm supposed to, but what about this and what about that? And getting into that grey zone where things are actually complex and we need to kind of try to figure out how it all works together. That is where, those are really, generally speaking in life, those are many of the most difficult and trying challenges. And when we put in the effort and we get through those challenges, the gratification and the reward is extremely deeply satisfying because the process has been complex and the reward is complex. So that's Tiferes. Tiferes is beauty because the greatest beauty comes from combining things, balancing, being in that gray zone, being in those different shades of gray and combining all the various factors and bringing them together. That's Tiferes, that's Rachamim, that's Yaakov. So we have Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov are primarily associated with the Midas Chesed, Gvura, and Tiferes. Good morning. Moshe Rabbeinu is primarily associated with Chachma. Now, in terms of the Midos, these are all Koiches. Chachma, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes are not all Midos. They're all Spheros, or Koiches. Now, just to clarify the terms Spheros and Koiches, the word Spheros refer to elements in the structure of realities, worlds. Olamos is the word we use in Hebrew. So, and they are consistent. Every single olam, every single world, there's Atzilus, Bria, Yetzira, Asiya. In Asiya, there's Asiya Ruchni, the world of action, the spiritual version of this world, and the physical version of this world, which is the reality that we experience. Every single one of these realities is built on the same structure, the same system of 10 components. 10 spheros. And they are Chachma Bina Das, which I would probably think the most accurate words to translate these spheres are conception, the conception of an idea, academic conception, a concept. Right, you say something, it's just a concept, it's not really spelled out. Conception. To conceive something means the very beginning of when something begins to exist. Conception, Bina would be comprehension, understanding things in detail. And Das would be connection, I think. An awareness, relating to something. Yes. So Das is the bridge, it's part of the Seichel. When we say Seichel, it means these, to an extent, academic faculties, the spheres of Chachma, Bina, Das, but Das is not strictly academic. Chachma and Bina, conception and comprehension. Comprehension is an academic activity, period. Das is not purely academic. Das is the bridge between the academic and the emotional. It's connection. It's connecting to the idea so that we integrate it into our person, into our experience, into who we are, and then that starts to influence the way we feel. So Das is the bridge between academic and emotional. Then we have the 7 midos, the 7, primarily I guess we could call them, to an extent, emotional elements, which are Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, which we've discussed, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchus. Every soul, every nefesh also has these 10 elements. In a nefesh, they're not called spheros. In a nefesh, in a soul, they're called koiches. There are 10 abilities, 10 functions of a soul.
So which one is the levush?
The levush is thought, speech, and action. Levush is what we do as opposed to the way that we are constructed. So the soul is built on this system of 10, then the levushim, the garments, are the things that it does. Thought is a form of action. It's an action, it's something, an activity of the mind. Ma'aseh is activity of the hands and feet. Dibur is activity of the mouth. Thought, speech, and action are all really varieties of action. They're things that we do, as opposed to the way that we're built, who we are, what we are. So there are 10 koiches, these 10 abilities, which are equivalent to the 10 spheros. And they have the same names because they are equivalent. We don't have spheros. And I'm just clarifying because the words koiches and spheros are often used out of context. A nefesh does not have spheros. A nefesh has koiches. An olam doesn't have koiches, it has spheros. But they're the same 10. The list of spheros is the same as the list of koiches because they are equivalent. The soul has these 10 abilities, Chachma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchus, because the soul has evolved into the way that it is by means of its journey through the Olamos. And the fact that it journeyed through the Olamos, which are built on spheros with these 10 names, means that the structure of the soul is going to reflect the structure of the worlds through which it journeyed. So it has 10 abilities which reflect and are equivalent to the 10 spheros in the world. So this structure of 10 is universal. It's in every soul, it's in every world, every reality. Really, it's in everything. Everything that exists, really, to an extent, is built upon this structure of 10. So Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov were associated with primarily the first three midas of Chesed, Gvura, and Tiferes. Moshe Rabbeinu was associated with Chochmah, the first sphera, the first koyach, which is technically higher than the midas. Seichel comes before midas. The academic faculties sit above in the hierarchy, above the emotional, which is reflected in a person. We say, Kabbalistically, the midas, the emotions, are primarily associated with the heart, as opposed to academia, which is primarily associated, Seichel is primarily associated with the brain. The brain sits above the heart. Now, higher up in the hierarchy, we don't necessarily mean more important. We mean in terms of the way that things work, the system, the functionality of the system, and what affects what influences what. So, Moshe Rabbeinu was Chachma. Now, if we want to discuss the difference between Seichel and Midos, our academic abilities, or just academic activity generally speaking, studying, learning, understanding, versus emotions, they're extremely different. Right? Emotions are our own individual dispositions. They are very different. We're all different academically, but in terms of the way that we interact with the world, the differences between us emotionally are more significant, I would say, practically speaking. The fact is that our emotions drive our behavior, primarily. So our emotions, to an extent, if we want to talk about our personality, the body of our personality is our emotions, our emotional disposition. That's what drives our behavior. It's what drives our actions. It's what drives our interactions with the people around us, with the world around us, with our environment. These are emotions, and emotions, by definition, are subjective. Emotions are supposed to be subjective. That's their job. My emotions are not even supposed ideally to be the same as any of your emotions. Emotions, their job is to be individual. Their job is to be subjective. They're supposed to be subjective. That's what emotions are. Intellect, hypothetically, its job is to be objective, not to be subjective. The job of my mind is not to have a position on something. My emotions are supposed to have a position. That's their job. To like, to dislike, to be attracted, to be repulsed. That's the job of my emotions. That's not the job of my mind. The job of my mind is, hypothetically at least, ideally, to be objective. Which means that there is an object, there's something that they are supposed to an extent, be secondary to. If I want to understand an idea, the job of my mind, contrary to popular belief and popular behavior, is not to find a way to make that idea suit my emotions. That's not my mind's job. That may be what my mind gets hired to do in the world, but that's not what my mind was created for. My mind was created to understand the idea, to pursue recognition of the awareness of information. Its job is to be objective. There is information. The job of my mind is to understand that information. I don't want to say mind necessarily. Mind's already a little more complex. The job of my seichel, of my chachma and bina, the job of the academic faculties with which I was born, is to understand, to process information. To be objective. There's information, the job of my seichel is to understand it. To an extent, it's almost the opposite of the job of midos. Did you want to ask something?
Yeah, so would you say that, can we connect the midot to subconscious? Because we are really run by our subconscious, not by conscious so much.
It depends what you mean by subconscious. That's a term that's thrown around a lot. Generally speaking...
Because we are run by it. We're not run by what we are aware of. We're run by what the emotion under the awareness is.
But the emotions behind the awareness are not what we refer to as midos. That would be things that are deeper. I mean, also there are many layers, but midos are exterior to seichel.
Okay.
So subconscious...
I have anger, I have an outside anger, and then there is an anger as a result of, let's say, something that happened that runs my life without me being aware of it. So which
That's still a midah.
Yeah,
It's subconscious relative to what you're aware of. Awareness, and that's why, if you noticed a couple minutes ago, I backtracked from the word mind and moved to seichel.
Okay.
Because mind is more complex. The mind is... It's something experiential. The mind is a combination of our seichel. Our midos generally are involved, and the mind is thought. The mind is where mental activity takes place, which is a combination of seichel and midos. Because the fact is, a lot of our thought processes are emotional.
Correct. Or create a certain emotion.
Correct. Well, those are two different things, both of which can be true.
Right. And there's still emotions. So what is the subconscious?
It depends what you mean by subconscious.
What I mean, like I said,
Subconscious can still be midos. It can still be exterior to seichel.
Exactly. But those are the ones that the mind cannot control sometimes.
The mind can control. It's a question of whether the person's aware and in touch with it. That's something else.
Okay, so how would you translate it to this? Because that's something so important.
It is
So
important.
Our life is run by our, what I say subconscious, I mean by the ones that we're
Well,
not aware of.
even the emotions that we are aware of. Not everybody uses their mind to control them. We can. It doesn't mean that we do.
According to the Kabbalah, we can, right? It's a training.
Right, so not everybody does, right? So the lack of all that is there, in terms of using the mind to control emotions that we are less aware of, that are buried deeper in our experience, all that means is that there are more barriers to exerting the seichel over the midos. But it doesn't mean that they are above the midos.
No, they're not
Above the seichel. They're still midos that are exterior to
You can train
seichel.
yourself, but the barrier, I think, is the awareness, whether you're
Of course.
aware of it or not.
So I'll tell you the truth. I don't love the term subconscious, which is why I'm having a hard time answering it, because it depends what you mean. Right? Different people mean very different things when they say subconscious. Is it the medical dictionary version? Is it the pop lingo version? So
Right. But usually what they mean is something that affects our emotion, that affects our life, that we're not aware of as a result of something.
So that could still be midos that are below seichel. It's just a matter of how aware we are, consciously aware of it we are.
The awareness is there.
But it doesn't mean that it's deeper in the nefesh than seichel.
No.
It's buried deeper in terms of our conscious experience
Awareness, right.
and our awareness, right?
So how do you translate that awareness? The difference between the two, let's put it this way, you can still be an angry person on the outside. And that's
Yes.
a midot.
True, they're both midos. It's just a question of how aware the person is of it.
So how do you translate the awareness
To what?
to the terms of the Kabbalah or the Sfirot? What would it be the difference between the two? Is awareness, we say, that's a Western term.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know off the top of my head what the term would be. The most accurate term in terms of Kabbalistic discussion for that is, I'm not sure.
Okay.
Um,
Something to look.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's so driving our life.
It is. In many cases, it is.
Yeah.
So we have seichel and we have midos. Now, the job of midos is not to ask questions. The job of midos, of emotions, is to react. That's what they were designed to do. Right? When someone reacts to something without thinking about it sufficiently, what do you say? You're being emotional. You're reacting. Emotions were designed to react. That's their job. Intellect, Chachma, Bina, our cognitive abilities were not designed to react. They were designed to investigate, to understand, to focus on the truth, to focus on the information, and to pursue the acquisition of that information, which is an objective process. It's not supposed to be reactive. It's supposed to be pursuing something objective, which by definition many times requires the asking of questions. The word investigating, one of the things that probably comes to mind first when you hear the word investigating is probing, digging, picking, and asking questions. So Moshe is the one who gave the Torah. In the conclusion of Torah Shebechsav, the conclusion of the entire written Torah, it says, Zichru Toras Moshe Avdi. Remember the Torah of Moshe, my servant. That's what Hashem says. Torah is referred to as the Torah of Moshe. It's Moshe's Torah. Moshe is defined as the giver, the representative, the all-time foremost ambassador of Torah. To the extent that Torah is actually named for him. It's called Moshe's Torah. So, Torah is information. Torah is academic. It's knowledge. Moshe is primarily associated with the Sphira of Chachma, and that's why he is the one who was the all-time foremost ambassador of Torah. Torah's information. Moshe's job was to be the ambassador of the information in Torah. The job of Chachma is to ask questions, to investigate. It says in Pirkei Avos, Loi habaishon lamed. One who is bashful will not learn. Learning involves asking questions. So when Moshe Rabbeinu asked a question, it's not necessarily a bad thing. That was Moshe's job. Moshe was the embodiment of the Sphira of Chachma. Chachma is conception. It's a cognitive function. Cognitive functions are designed to be involved in the objective pursuit of the acquisition of information. That is the definition of the function of cognitive abilities. At least Chachma and Bina. Das, which is the third in Seichel, its job is to form the bridge. Because just having cognitive abilities, just Chachma and Bina, isn't going to help us realize the purpose of creation. Right? The purpose of existence is to make a dira b'tachtonim, to bring divinity into the world, to uplift the world, to unite matter and spirit. Call it what you want. These are all different terms for the same general thing. They focus on different elements of it. But this is the purpose of creation. We cannot realize the purpose of creation if we don't interact with the world around us. If we sit and just engage in academic activity, always, the world's going to stay the same as it always was. Our brains are going to become more dense. We're going to actually probably grow, depending how hard we push ourselves, we could actually grow new neural tissue. Our neurons will grow new tissue to be able to, new synapses, to be able to connect with each other, etc., to be able to transmit and process information. But we're not affecting the world around us. So, although academic activity is described as being higher up, which is why if we look at the vertical alignment of the human body, the brain is above the heart. In terms of the structure of the world, there's Chachma Bina Das come before the Midos, before the Chesed, Gvur, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yisod, Malchus. But at the end of the day, that's not the be-all and end-all. We are here to interact with our surroundings. In terms of environment, in terms of people, in terms of objects, in terms of circumstances, challenges.
And ultimately the youth.
Correct. And the part of us that is involved in engaging the world around us is our midos primarily. Now, in order for us to be... So why do we have to have seichel? Why can't we just have midos? Midos, just having emotions, could be an extremely powerful positive thing. If a person has red-hot emotions that are all focused in the right direction, it can be incredibly powerful. But we all know that that's not the way things always go. There have been one or two instances, at least since the dawn of time, when someone's emotions weren't exactly in line with the purpose of creation. So, the job of seichel, or a big part of the job of seichel, of our cognitive functions, is to inform our emotions, to pursue the acquisition of information, i.e. to become aware of the truth. But there has to be a bridge between our cognitive abilities and our emotions, otherwise there's not going to be any... Functionally, our academic pursuit and our cognitive abilities are not going to change anything. So da'as is part of the seichel, but it's not purely academic in nature. It's the bridge. It's that focusing on the ideas. Once you've had conceived the idea and then comprehended it, broken it down and understood it, there's then connecting with it so that it can start to actually affect the way we feel. That's why Chassidus Chabad is called Chabad. It's not because it's all about academia. Like standing on the corner of the street in Manhattan asking strange people that you've never met, random people, if they've put on tefillin and they look at you like you're nuts, and somehow 60 seconds later you've got them strapped up in leather that they don't even know what it is definitely not an academic activity. Right? And that's one of the things that Chabad is known for. So why is it called Chabad? Chochmah Bina Das. Because the purpose, in a certain context at least, the purpose of this academic pursuit is to have a correctly informed cognitive experience so that it can influence our emotional dispositions. The job of da'as is to connect with what we know, connect with what we've learned, and allow it to inform not only the way we perceive things academically, but the way we feel about things. That's da'as. Moshe is not associated with da'as. Moshe is associated with chochmah. Moshe is primarily associated with chochmah. Now, just to bring out just a little more to emphasize, I guess, the objectivity, right? And I was emphasizing this earlier on. Midos are designed by definition, their job is to be subjective, to be reactive. The function of chokhmah, the function of cognitive abilities is not to react, and it's not to be subjective. Its job is to be objective. Hypothetically, chokhmah is supposed to be an objective pursuit. The word chokhmah can be broken down into two halves. The first half, if we switch around the letters, we get koyach, ability. These abilities, we said 10 koychos. The soul has 10 abilities. Which koyach is chokhmah? It's the koyach of ma. What? What is perhaps the quintessential question? Chokhmah is the koyach of what? Of asking. Of pursuing the objective truth.
That's why. What happened?
Of bittul. Midos are not concerned with how, what, and why. They're reactive. They're subjective. It doesn't mean that they're not interested in facts, but their nature primarily is subjective and reactive. Our cognitive abilities were designed to ask. Right? When you are pursuing objective truth, when I'm pursuing objective truth, if I'm pursuing objective truth, it's not about me. It's about the truth. Me is not part of this picture in terms of the actual pursuit of the truth. Doesn't mean that anyone who's investigating and pursuing truth has no sense of self. But in terms of, if you focus purely on the experience of pursuing truth, the activity of pursuing truth is focused if it's a real, honest, objective pursuit of the truth, it's not focused on me. It's focused on the truth. It's focused on the facts. It's focused on the information. The acquisition of information, the object of that, it's objective. It's the pursuit of information. It's ma. It's not about me. What am I? I'm irrelevant in the face of the information that I'm trying to acquire. Chachma is koyach ma. It's asking questions. It's objective pursuit of information, of the facts, and it's a sense of bittul, a lack of sense of self. Right? When you get really carried away, deeply engrossed in an investigation of whatever it is, you're investigating an idea, a concept, you're pursuing the information, pursuing the truth. If you get really involved, you can absolutely lose your sense of self. Because it's not about... There's no way that you lose your sense of self when you're having an argument with someone, an emotional argument. It's all about me when I'm arguing with someone. It's my emotions, my feelings. When I'm pursuing information, it's not about me, it's about the information. And I can completely... There's no... You say that someone lost themselves in an argument, what it means is perhaps that they lost their sense of boundaries or their sense of self-respect because they were so carried away in themselves, in their feelings. They didn't completely lose their sense of self. In the pursuit of information, exactly, in the pursuit of information, you can lose your sense of self. It's koyach ma, what? Bittul. A lack of sense of self. So Moshe Rabbeinu asking, is it necessarily associated with ego? It's associated with investigation, with the pursuit of information. That was his job. Toras Moshe. Moshe is the embodiment of the Sphira of Chachma, which is a cognitive function. Cognitive functions are designed to pursue information, to pursue the acquisition of information, which by definition involves asking questions. It wasn't a bad thing. So now what's Hashem coming back and saying? Hashem's coming back and saying, oh, well, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov didn't ask questions. Yeah, wasn't their job. They're middos. They weren't supposed to ask questions. What do you want from me? So what was Hashem actually saying to Moshe? Hashem's response to Moshe that Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov didn't ask questions, the middos didn't ask questions. Well, we know the middos didn't ask questions. It's not their job. So what's Hashem saying? And what Hashem was getting at in this response was the fact that, and this is something, there's a term in Kabbalah and in Chassidus that's hiskalalos. Hiskalalos means inclusion. Now, inclusion in the context of Jewish mysticism, the term hiskalalos, what it refers to is the fact that there's nothing that has completely and entirely its own unique nature with no elements of anything else. Right? We have chesed and gvura. These are the prime examples we always use of opposites, middos. Now with middos, chachma and bina are also opposites to an extent in terms of the way they behave and the way they function, which is why we have, when you draw the maps of the spheres, you have chachma on the right and gvura on the left, like you have chesed on the right. Sorry, chachma on the right and bina on the left, like you have chesed on the right and gvura on the left. I could have just done that, but I'm used to doing it with my right hand. Right?
Which one is more, right?
It's not... Sorry?
Which one is the ruler? Is it chachma or chesed? It's a combination, right?
Right, so...
It depends which one is more or less.
Yes. And even within the structure of the seichel and the middos. Right? In Sphira Sa'omer, how many days of Sphira do we count? 49 days. 7 middos, 7 squared is 49. We count every night of the Sphira when we count. In the prayer that we say afterwards, asking Hashem to help us repair ourselves, repair our soul, repair the world. Every night we refer to a different midah. But it's not 7, there's 49. The first week is the week of Chesed. There's Chesed sheba Chesed, Gvura sheba Chesed, Tiferes sheba Chesed, etc.
7, so 7 times 7.
Right. So the midah of Chesed, the Sphira of Chesed, this emotional disposition this emotional attribute that we have in our soul, that the worlds have in the spheres, is not just pure, unadulterated chesed. As we said earlier, the true beauty is in complexity. And the spheres are incredibly complex. Chesed has 7 different sub-emotional elements. Within the emotional disposition of chesed, the attribute of chesed, there's the chesed component, or the chesed variety. There's the gvura variety of chesed. There's the tiferes variety of chesed, the tiferes component within chesed. Right, with teachers, there aren't just 2 kinds of teachers, chesed teacher and gvura teacher. There are chesed teachers who will incorporate different aspects of gvura and tiferes and netzach hod and yesod into their overarching chesed approach. So this is why in Sphira we count 49 days, because there are 7 middos, but each of the middos actually is made up of sub-middos, sub-emotions, components, elements, which are each of the 7 different middos. So you have 7 middos, each of which has 7 different components, elements, varieties. So you have 49. And the fact is, when you want to make progress, real progress is in the details. That's why in Sphira, when we're working on changing our character, we don't just do chesed, gvura, tiferes. Chesed is a big beast to tackle all at once. If we break it down into chesed, sheba chesed, gvura, sheba chesed, tiferes, sheba chesed, do it over a week, focusing on the details are where true progress is. Right? It's nice to be inspired and want to change the world. But there's no such thing as just changing the world. Changing the world happens as a result of a series of actions. Each action is specific and tackles a specific thing. And sometimes the vast majority of actions are very specific. And if you look at the actual thing that's being tackled by this action, not a project, but an action, it's very limited, it's very specific. But at the end of the day, with a series of actions, you can change the world. You can't change the world by just changing the world. There's no such thing. Changing the world happens as a result of actions. The magic is in the details. The hiskalos, from a Kabbalistic perspective, what it means is not that chesed is saying, hey, we're opposites, let's include each other. It's, hey, we have different functionalities. We're both here to serve a greater purpose. We're not actually opposites. We're different approaches to realizing the same purpose.
Let's complete each other.
Which is why I have incorporated your nature into mine. I haven't become you, but there is gvura within chesed. Gvura hasn't ceased to be different from chesed. Chesed and gvura are still opposites. But gvura, chesed has now incorporated an element of gvura into it, as well as all the others. So there are 49 sub-middos. This isn't only true of chesed versus gvura, this is true of seichel versus middos. Seichel, now, and this is, gosh, we need like another hour and we've got 6 minutes, as usual. So, right, and in the Olamos, we talk about the world of Tohu versus the world of Tikkun. Is everyone here familiar somewhat? Tohu is the world of chaos, which is not part of the system we discuss generally. Tohu is a world of chaos. Tohu is this world of chaos. There were middos, and there was no hiskalalos. And it didn't last. It imploded, it exploded, it was a disaster. Why? Because if you have chesed and gvura, and there's no... The problem was, there wasn't a bittul, an awareness of the greater purpose. Each of us in the room is different. If we have no bittul, if we have no sense of the fact that there's something that's greater than all of us, and we're all equally a part of it, we're all equally a part of something greater. We're not here to fight each other. If we have no appreciation for that, things probably aren't going to be very pretty for very long. But we can be complete opposites. But if we all have a recognition of the fact that we're a part of something greater, there's a purpose to existence, there's a creator, there's a purpose for which we exist, We are opposite in our dispositions, in our natures, because we have opposite functions to fulfill, to realize the same purpose. We don't have to oppose each other. We can work together despite of, or even because of, our opposite natures. That's true of the midos. That's where we get hiskalalos. Because of a recognition of the greater purpose, that which we serve, our opposite tendencies don't have to define us as having an opposition behaviorally, as fighting each other. We have opposite approaches to things. We can also incorporate those into our own approach, which is what the world of tikkun is, the world of reparation. The world of Toya, which had no recognition, no bittul, exploded. It was a disaster. Now we have a recognition, the world of tikkun, there's reparation. We can repair that, not because I cease to be me and you cease to be you, but because you and I both recognize the greater good we're here to serve, and therefore can use our dispositions for that, and can respect each other for the fact that we're opposite. Doesn't mean we have to cease to be opposite. This isn't only true of chesed and gvura, it's true of seichel and midos. Now, what Hashem is saying to Moshe Rabbeinu is, yes, you are associated with chachma. You are associated primarily with the pursuit of information, which is an objective activity which involves asking. But Hashem says to Moshe, don't forget about his skulls. Don't forget about also incorporating elements of the nature of midos into your approach. Although on one hand, academia, cognitive activities, the approach of truth is objective, is more bottle, as opposed to midos, which are subjective and all about me. At the same time, midos don't ask questions. Midos have their directions and they just bolt, which can be dangerous, which is why we have to use our mind to try to attenuate and inform our emotions. But if we look at it from a very technical perspective, emotions don't inquire. Emotions have their direction and they just go with it. As opposed to academic activities, which ask and ask and ask and inquire. And Hashem is saying to Moshe Rabbeinu, don't forget, with the fact that academic activities are more objective, less subjective, generally more bottled than midos, but don't forget that, at least from a technical perspective, there's something that you can learn. You can learn from the fact that midos get the directive and go with it. They don't ask. Don't forget that even though your job is to inquire and to pursue information, there's also a time and place to just accept. Asking questions is not a bad thing. Asking questions is healthy. Asking questions is necessary, and it's an integral part of Torah study. It's an integral part of Jewish culture. But, and to just perhaps connect this to a real tangible directive, something that we can, something that we can relate it back to in our lives day to day. There's asking questions, but asking it with a recognition, with a certain respect. When I ask questions all the time, there's a lot of things in Torah that I ask. And I ask questions. If you look through Torah, Torah's replete with questions. The whole Talmud is a series of questions and arguments. And if you read the commentaries you look at Tosfos, which is one of the two foremost commentaries on the Talmud, which is actually printed in the Talmud, almost every single one begins with a question. What's the terminology that's very frequently used with questions? Kusha. It's difficult. Kosher. It's hard. What does it mean? Why is it hard? It's hard to understand. When I ask a question, I'm not asking, oh, well, that doesn't make sense, it must not be true, come and defend your position. I'm having difficulty understanding how this works. I haven't yet reached the point of having this all worked out and understanding how it works. So even though asking is an integral part of chachma, of investigation, of pursuing information, of learning Torah, of being a Jew, certainly ethnically and culturally, asking questions is a very big part of that. There's how we ask the question. I can ask a question without having any sense of questioning my recognition of the fact that Torah is true and that Hashem is correct. It doesn't mean I can't ask. I can ask, Kusha, it's difficult. I don't understand. I don't understand how this works. I can present the exact same thing which seems to me to be a contradiction, but I can say, you contradicted yourself. That's wrong. You're wrong. You clearly don't know what you're talking about. You clearly don't have a consistent position. You clearly don't even know what you think. Or I could say, over here you said this, over here you said that. That seems to me to be a contradiction. How does that work? Same contradiction, very different question. So, just let me finish the thought. So, although asking is not only acceptable, but important and encouraged and required, that doesn't mean that even in koyach ma, even in chokhmah, even in the pursuit of information, there isn't a role to play for the aspect which the midos embody, which is going with it. I'm going with my acceptance of the fact that Torah is true. That is going to be something that I go with unquestioningly. Because I have decided that that is something I believe, it's something that's fundamental to my belief system. And if my faith in that is strong enough, it doesn't have to be undermined by questions, and it doesn't have to undermine questions. It's not a contradiction. It's just a matter of how I ask. There's, that doesn't make sense, it must be wrong, or there's kusha. It's difficult, I don't understand. Please help me understand how this works. How this is the truth. How this makes sense. Hashem was telling Moshe, yes, you are Chokhmah, yes, your job is to ask, but don't forget, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov didn't ask. Now, yes, they are emotions whose job is not to ask, and you are Seichel, you are Chokhmah, whose job is to ask, but don't forget there's Hiskalalus. Don't forget that the fact that they go with something without asking questions, that element is something you can also incorporate into your approach. They didn't ask questions. Make sure that your questions, when you ask, also have that sense of going with what you're committed to unquestioningly. And if that's the foundation for your question, you're good to go. You can ask what you want, as long as it's built on that foundation of unwavering commitment. And that's why Moshe asked. He was supposed to ask. And Hashem was just reminding him, asking's not wrong, it's your job, but keep it in check. Don't forget to incorporate this element of midos. And keep in mind, at the end of the day, because midos take something and go with it, midos are what get the job done. At the end of the day, we only change the world around us with our midos. It's our emotions that drive our behavior. If our emotions are in the right direction, we're good to go. We can turn the world over in a very positive way. It's our emotions that affect the people around us. It's emotions that drive our actions that change the world around us. And so Hashem's saying, if you want to change the world, don't forget, you have to have that sense of an unwavering commitment to go with it, regardless. It doesn't mean don't ask, but it means ask with bittul. If you ask with bittul, if you incorporate that sense of bittul, if you have hiskalalus, and you have the inclusion of that element of the midos, the fact that they go with what they're committed to unquestioningly, and you can incorporate that into your questions, then you can be like the midos. Midos can change the world. Midos power the changing. They power activity. They power change. You can power change. And you can power positive change as long as you incorporate that element of unwavering, unquestioning commitment. If that's your foundation, you can ask whatever you want. But don't forget to have that unwavering commitment. And that unwavering commitment is exemplified by midos, by emotions. And that's why Hashem was responded, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov didn't ask. Doesn't mean don't ask, but it means remember to have that unwavering, unquestioning commitment at least underlying behind your questions, and then you can also have what the middos have, which is that they drive change. They drive outcomes. Have a good week, everyone.